Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world and when in the world you are. Thank you for joining us. It's time for Keeping It Real. It's time to talk to James Valliant. James, how are you doing on this fine morning?
I am doing stupendously well, my brother, and I want to thank you for putting together such an amazing collection of questions and answers for us today from indeed Keeping It Real for this Peikoff Wednesday. Thank you, my brother. How are you?
I am doing well. You know, this is a topic, it can be hard to keep it real because we are currently, and in this case, I'm talking about Mrs. Nasir, Amy and I are currently running a fundraiser for an objectivist. You think, well, why would you do that? Well, he's fallen on some hard times. Specifically, he's fighting cancer right now. But aren't we against self-sacrifice? And isn't charity fully optional? And it's an interesting question because the answers aren't as obvious as they might seem. Every time I think I've got something figured out, I go to this volume, Keeping It Real, and get a little different insight. And, oh yeah, Dr. Peikoff kind of true to my path there. You know, I was reading from Virtue of Selfishness, the ethics of emergencies. And if I could just read a couple paragraphs from there real quick. Ayn Rand says, by elevating the issue of helping others into the central and primary issue of ethics, altruism has destroyed the concept of any authentic benevolence or goodwill among men. It has indoctrinated men with the idea that to value another human being is an act of selflessness, thus implying that man can have no personal interest in others, that to value another means to sacrifice oneself, that any love, respect, or admiration a man may feel for others is not and cannot be a source of his own enjoyment, but is a threat to his existence, a sacrificial blank check signed over to his loved ones. And she goes on, if you haven't read The Ethics of Emergencies in a while, it's a great read. She does say, most men do not accept or practice either side of altruism's viciously false dichotomy, but the result is a total intellectual chaos on the issue of proper human relationships and on such questions as the nature, purpose, or extent of the help that one may give others. Today, a great many well-meaning, reasonable men do not know how to identify or conceptualize the moral principles that motivate their love, affection, or goodwill, and can find no guidance in the field of ethics, which is dominated by the stale platitudes of altruism. And unquote, Ayn Rand is absolutely right. And that's why I think this morning is going to be valuable to all of us.
We have how not everyone is worthy of my love. And indeed, some people are outright dangerous to me. I've got to be able to distinguish. Well, I'm going to use some really, really extreme examples, but to make the point clear here. But I've got to be able to distinguish the Adolf Hitlers and the Charles Mansons of this world, the Jeffrey Dahmers of this world, to pick extreme examples, I know, from what? The guy who's going to cure cancer, maybe provide some hope for the people that we really value and care about, like Robert, who right now is struggling with cancer. How do we distinguish heroes from villains? How do I distinguish something positive for humanity and me versus something that is a killer? Ayn Rand said, if it's appropriate to feel pity for the victims of a monster, it is treason to feel that same kind of compassion for the torturers. And if you don't have a sense of your own values, if you don't have a sense of you, the integrity of your mind is foremost. That's why you have to, in one sense, come first. But if you do have this firm sense, sure, as objectivists, we say our own purpose and our own mind are got to be at the pinnacle of our values. That's true. That's what's going to help me even evaluate my other values, every other value in my life, such as other people. But apart from my productive work, honestly, Robert, what can be a higher value to me than other people? People who share my values, virtuous people, people with whom I can trust and interact and voluntarily deal with and admire and have affection for and love. So, yes.
Yes. Now, I've got to lay a couple things out right at the start because there's some confusion in the chat. Robert Garmong, Dr. Robert Garmong, is a philosopher and author living in China. And he, unfortunately, is fighting cancer. No, when we talk about Robert having cancer, it's not me. Fortunately, at least not as far as I know. No, Dr. Garmong, Garmong, that'll come up in a moment.
An amazing,
Second of all,
an amazing
I'm sorry.
guy. I just want to throw in, a few years ago, Amy Peikoff and I interviewed him for our podcast. What an amazing guy he is. And I just wanted to throw that in. Please go over to one of the social media pages about the fundraiser that the Nasirs are running for Mr. Garmong. Please do check it out. He's a wonderful man.
Right. And since we're talking about fundraising, as always, on the top of the YouTube chat, you see a link to AynRandCenter.co.uk. Go to that website, click membership at the top. If you're not already a member, choose one of those 5 membership levels. Each one has perks. All of them support the ARCUK. Your super chats as well support this channel, support podcasts, episodes like this. Jonathan Honig is already in with a contribution. Thank you very much for that. Now, as we're talking about Dr. Garmong, if you want to contribute to that fundraiser, just go to tinyurl.com/garmong, or go to robertnasir.com. The link is right at the top. Not to get too much into that, we're not going to make this a big fundraising effort, although we'd love to see a few contributions in that regard. Support the channel, support Dr. Garmong. But what I really want to do is clarify these issues. Maybe by the time we're done, you'll say, oh yeah, I don't have funds for that right now, although I support it. Or maybe you'll say, I have a few dollars, let me skip a coffee today. And James, let me start with question number 1, because I chose an easy one to start. This is an area where I've always thought, well, if you have decent parents, don't you kind of owe something for the 18 years they put in for you? Well, that's a little loose. Let's get a better answer from Leonard Peikoff. He was asked, what, if anything, does a person owe his parents? And he starts off his answer saying, assuming decent parents, he owes them, so far as they have not mistreated him, respect. If they have, in fact, been good to him and helped foster his values, he should love them. Well, you can't make love an obligation, but it would follow if they're those kind of parents. He should feel gratitude to them. He should be polite to them. Now, let me stop the answer for a moment there. And James, you remember we did an episode on on emotional shoulds, the hazards of emotional shoulds, trying to tell yourself you should feel a certain way. And James, you made it very clear. You can't put a should on an emotion. It's an automatic reaction to your subconscious evaluations. They happen automatically. But Leonard Peikoff goes on, and I love this about Dr. Peikoff. He says, now you're trying to get me to say that when they're old, he owes them upkeep. No, he doesn't, because they are not breeding slaves. They're not breeding someone to look after them in their old age. If he has the money and he loves them and it's not a sacrifice, great. But he does not owe his parents tit for tat financially. And he goes on to say the same is true for any crisis they go through. It's much, and he wraps up this way real quick. It's much more a one-way street. The parents owe more to the child than the child does to the parents because the parents made the choice to bring him into existence. He didn't. Unquote. Yeah, that line. No, he doesn't, because they're not breeding slaves. That really makes it clear, doesn't it?
Absolutely clear. You know, the parents have made a unilateral decision. They obviously couldn't consult you on whether or when to bring you into existence. They made a unilateral decision. And not only that, they made a unilateral decision to bring a human into this world that was helpless, unable to take care of itself. I mean, it takes months and months to get the child to walk and to not defecate in its diapers and to talk. And so what we're talking about is bringing a utterly helpless creature into this world, all on your own decision. No, the parents are the ones who obviously owe the child sufficient care until that child is capable of taking care of him or herself. That's the moral obligation side. Now, you ask about the broader issue. No, they're not breeding slaves. You don't have any moral obligation simply because they discharged what was their moral obligation, thank you. But you know something, I had above and beyond parents. Yeah, I don't mean to I know I should avoid personal examples as I try my best to, but I had parents that were so stupendous and went above and beyond. They were better than normal parents. They were extremely thoughtful parents. They were extremely considerate parents. They encouraged me when I discovered Ayn Rand. They encouraged my dreams. They helped me above and beyond what I think a parent's moral obligations are. So do I feel gratitude for them? You bet. You bet. It was but you know something, any unilateral gift is the same thing. They're giving it because of, presumably, if they're rational, for their own selfish reasons. If it didn't come with if you promise on the other side, like a contract, I'll do this if you do that. If they just give it to you, again, you don't have any specific debt to them. But as I say, I feel such a sense of gratitude for what they did unilaterally for me without expecting anything in return, that what I feel is tremendous love, tremendous affection, and I will be there whenever they need me. But that's my sense of my affection, my sense of my values. It's not because I have some contractual duty to them, even for the stuff that they did unilaterally that went above and beyond.
Yeah, very, very well said. It's one of these cases where the amount of gratitude I feel for my existence and, those first 18 years of getting me from being completely and utterly helpless to the
Right.
point where I am self-sufficient. My gratitude is so enormous that sometimes it can be a challenge to say, yes, but it's not an intrinsic obligation. And there are bad parents out there who, despite the fact that they created this person and maybe got them through their helpless years, deserve no gratitude, no respect. So it can't be automatic, as Ayn Rand
So
reminds us,
many,
values cannot be automatic.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but so many people feel guilty because some rotten parent mistreated them. And it's not even just criminal physical type abuse, but psychological or intellectual abuse that they got from their parents. And they feel justly anger for what happened to them, for how their parents treated them. And they feel guilty for that. Or if your parents actually did abuse you, you be angry and hate them for the hateful thing they did. And don't you dare not hold back one drop of that just resentment and anger you feel for them. They did you wrong. And just because they're your parent doesn't mean that they necessarily fulfilled the moral obligation they had to you as a helpless baby either. Oh boy, I'm sorry. I've just run across that so often with people saying, oh, I can't feel anger or even hatred for a mother who abused them. Well, she is, after all, my mom. How can they feel this internal guilt? Altruism has conditioned us to believe that, yeah, I have to love mother no matter what she did to me, even if she physically abused me. No, 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 and no. Boy, is that common now.
Yes. Just as an aside, I can't resist going back to Ted Lasso because that ends up playing out in Dr. Garmong's fundraiser. There's a sequence toward the end in which Ted Lasso confronts his mother. Loving relationship, but the whole sequence is he says, thank you, as they were growing up, for example, and facing challenges that I won't spoil. And then he says, F you, a lot of profanity in that series, but well done, for shielding me from this and for not expressing these things. Thank you and F you and thank you and F you. And would that we could have that nuanced relationship with our parents to say, I have enormous gratitude for you, except in these areas. Instead of feeling like I need to never express any negatives or never put any nuance into my judgment of my parents. I think you can love them more deeply if you are willing to also be honest about their shortcomings.
And that's a healthy adult relationship with your parents, to be able to have that kind of communication. Mom, you kind of splashed some cold water on my dreams there. And I know you did it out of love because you didn't want me to get hurt and disappointed. But nonetheless, you were pouring cold water on my dreams there, Mom. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about people I know. in
Yeah.
particular too. And to have that kind of nuanced communication is what we can do when we have a healthy relationship with our parents as we get older. You know, we all have contexts, including mom and dad. And that kind of healthy communication can actually be good for both parties if it was a positive relationship, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always hard to think of our parents as people like other people.
But guess
Strangest
what they
thing.
are?
Do a whole show on that, and maybe we
We
will. But
could just on that one.
let me jump to question number two, because this is kind of related. There's this question of empathy and helping out people in trouble. And Leonard Peikoff was asked this, and you can see this goes back a little bit. The question was originally asked in 2009. Why is it that when disaster strikes, such as on 9/11, people tend to draw together? And Leonard Peikoff starts off a fairly long answer, but he starts it off like this. I think the answer here is obvious. The event brings the focus and emphasis to crucial common values: the value of individual life, the value of the United States, the value of a great city. That's on everybody's mind in a circumstance like that. Once strong values are in the air and shared by everybody, and you can see it from their expressions, then you feel like talking to people, you draw together. I don't think it's only the fear of being alone. I think it's attraction to people within that context who hold those values. They've been hurt by the same thing as against ordinary New Yorkers walking down the street, or thinking about a million different things, and probably regarding that person across the street as a member of the mafia or a potential pervert. Well, they certainly wouldn't draw together. The context here brings it out. And it's not only disaster that brings it out. The same phenomenon can be seen on the other side. You should have seen the crowds in Florida when the astronauts took off for the moon in 1969. Vast crowds, 1 million or more people, totally sympathetic, living shoulder to shoulder, all drawn by the positive, the heroic mission, and the astronauts and the conquest of space. It was very similar, but on a more positive side. Unquoting Dr. Peikoff, I love that he's able to say it's not just disaster that draws us together, because it wasn't the disaster, it was the values. And so it applies as much to, and in some ways more,
A
to
breathless
accomplishment.
sense. I see, it's an incredible thing. You know, achievement is individual. Getting us to the moon was the achievement, though, of dozens and dozens of brilliant and hardworking men and women. But nonetheless, each one of them, their contribution was an individual thing. I did not invent the rocket like Mr. Goddard did. I did not invent electronics, but there's an incredible sense of fraternity, of brotherhood and sisterhood between humanity when you see humans accomplishing some great thing like that. I mean, just as, in fact, I would say it's far more important that we have those positive experiences. But I'll never forget 9/11. I will never forget that morning. It did. You know, I was crying and hugging people that day till my eyes hurt. Till my eyes hurt. My wife knew people who worked in that building and died that day. It hit us hard. I loved that city. I still love that city. I lived in New York City. It was a devastating thing. Of course, but it's only that sense of shared values, either the positive or the negative. It's only because you know, there were Palestinians I saw also that day on the news celebrating and cheering how wonderful it was that thousands of innocent people, men and women and children, died that day, and they were cheering in the streets as I was crying and hugging my friends and calling my friends in New York to make sure they were okay. It depends on your values and the integrity of your mind. Yeah, you in that sense have to come first, so you can distinguish those who share our values and those who don't. But when you do share values, it's an automatic. It's like one of the wonderful things about emotion. It's like we don't have to think about it. We just hug each other. We just hug each other, and we know in that silent, powerful hug where we share that kind of value. But what a value that was to me, to hug someone who did share my values that day, and we understood each other's pain that day. Uh, that is one, apart from our productive purpose in life, what can be a higher value other than the people that are most important to us? What can be a higher value other than the people with whom I live and share, my life? If I can find people of value, like you, Mr. Nasir, that those people have to be so high up on the tier of my values that if they don't make a huge difference to me emotionally, I'm dead inside. I'm dead inside. I can't be selfish. I can't be getting the most out of life. I can't be.
Right.
If I can't share your joy, whether it's the takeoff of Apollo 11, if I can't share your pain, if it is this horrible, the darkest day of America in my lifetime, 9/11, that sense of shared values is critical to me as a human being. We are not atomized individuals, so rugged that we don't need or appreciate or value other human beings. No, they're critical to my life. They're critical to my happiness, and they're critical at critical moments like that in particular.
I'm so glad you mentioned the value of other people, as long as they're decent people, as long as they contribute something to your life. Because, and the reason why I wanted the episode named Altruism versus Benevolence, we're all too familiar with altruism, with self-sacrifice, both in politics, and you see it, all over the left, but nowadays even on the right. Read C. Bradley Thompson's book to see how much sacrifice the right wants and how much they hate self-assertion, regard us as all classical liberals as the same as leftists. Anybody who's not willing to sacrifice for the nation. It's amazing, the idea that the founding fathers are no longer heroes to those people because they were too self-interested, too interested in the individual and not in the nation. But without getting too much into politics, socially, we're called on to sacrifice and as if benevolence means tearing your heart out and handing it to your neighbor who needs a heart transplant. Authentic benevolence is just unimaginable to that kind of person.
No,
so I've got to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's one of the most selfish things I can do, to help the people that are of value to me. It's not a sacrifice at all. It's the support of my values. It is understanding the scope and long-range nature of my values. It's being true to my values. It's the highest form of selfishness. Just as Ayn Rand says, romantic love is this pinnacle form of selfishness, can't be understood in any other way. So it is with all my other human values. They are a high selfish value to me. It's that how did we ever go down this path where we thought that other human beings, that selfishness meant either living on a desert island or being such a lone wolf that I say F you to the rest of the world? That would be the most unselfish approach I can possibly imagine.
Yes.
Cutting myself off from
either
this
side
giant value that other people do represent to me.
Yes.
Bizarre.
And with that in mind, I've got to read the last paragraph of Leonard Peikoff's answer to that question. And this will really hammer home why I regard this episode as altruism versus benevolence. Leonard Peikoff says, quote, "Even on a very small scale, whenever you find a value that somebody else shares in an innocent context, you tend to feel, for that moment, warmer and therefore easier to talk to than you normally would be. For instance, if you dance and you go out on a dance floor and dance next to a couple that are total strangers to you, well, if they were walking down the street and you were walking down the street, it might never occur to you to start a conversation. When you're dancing, though, you feel, well, we all like the music. We're moving to it, and we're doing the same dance. And you say something like, well, you're really good at this. And they say, yeah, we've been doing this for years. And it goes on like that. So you start a conversation, which you never would do if you didn't have something in common. Not just a common action like digging ditches, but a common value. I think that's a pretty straightforward answer, unquote Leonard Peikoff. That it's benevolence, that brotherhood of values, when there really are real values there. And it doesn't have to be we're all objectivists.
No,
we are decent people with joy in living and real values that are pro-life.
I just think of going to a fireworks display this last 4th of July. I mean, there's my wife and I with the complete strangers, and there's this sense of shared values, so that suddenly everyone is friendly and relaxed. There's this light sort of benevolent, caring about each other that goes on because we know we share these values. Ladies and gentlemen, I just cannot resist adding here. If you want to meet with people with whom you share profound values, think about going to an OCON, to the International Objectivist Conference put on annually by the Ayn Rand Institute. There you'll meet dozens of people who really share a range of common values with you of such importance that those kind of opportunities, seize those moments where you can connect with people on your important values. But even something so mild as being on the same dance floor or watching a fireworks display with total strangers, you can suddenly have this shared sense of values. I also think one of my favorite scenes in all of Ayn Rand's literature is the running of the John Galt line. And she gives you a sense of that like nothing else. Where Americans see achievement, they know what Reardon Medal, they know the controversy, they know they know what Dagny's trying to do to save the economy, and there's this sense that everyone has of the positive values and moving forward of humanity and what this means. It's like the Apollo 11 thing. Ayn Rand captures that so brilliantly in the running of the John Galt line. Again, it's just a commercial for Atlas Shrugged, but people, if you haven't read it, for gosh sakes, do yourself a favor and read that book. It's an inspirational scene.
Right. Now, lest this start feeling a little too touchy-feely, I have two more questions in addition to the two we've read. And these two folks, these come from the same podcasts from which the Keeping It Real book was put together, but they were not included in the book. So I had to transcribe these myself. If you're looking for them, you can find them on the old index of Leonard Peikoff's podcasts. The website's a little, it needs some maintenance. So if you're having trouble accessing that, feel free to reach out to me on the socials, and I'll share with you the secrets of getting into that material. But Leonard Peikoff was asked, if you find self-interest, that's a funny way of putting it, if you find self-interest in helping others, is it still considered an objectivist act? Another one of those questions where the way that it's asked right away gives you some clues. And Leonard Peikoff, of course, gets right into it. He says, quote, well, the word find gives that question away because it means if you feel self-interest in helping others. Self-interest is not something you find. It has an objective definition. It's not subjective. The principle of egoism is proved as necessary for man's life, whereas altruism is self-destructive. That's explained at length in the objectivist literature. So the fact that you enjoy it does not make it to your interest, any more than if you enjoyed a diet rich in fat without protein would be for your gastronomic self-interest, even if you find, quote, self-interest in it, unquote. Now, this does not mean that it's wrong to help others under certain conditions. Those are spelled out in the literature. As I'll say in passing, it's part of what we're spelling out today. They must deserve it. They must be in no way responsible for their situation. It must not involve a sacrifice on your part. And they have to be grateful and not think it's their due to get help. And he wraps up his answer by saying, read The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand.
Wow. Never sacrifice yourself. You see, going back to what I said earlier, if you are feeling that compassion for just pick the extreme example again, compassion for the torturer, just as you were feeling compassion for the victim. No, that's not compassion of any kind. That's hatred for mankind as such, in my view. Yeah. No, they have to deserve it. They can't have made their own misery. They can't be bad people, because that will involve a sacrifice to you, a sacrifice of your values in some way. Promise. No, they have to actually be. You can't be doing it for their flaws or vices or weaknesses. What you're doing is you're doing it for the value of them as a human being. Even if you don't know them well, even if it is, I don't like the word charity. for many reasons. But let's say that you're being benevolent to strangers, which I think there are all kinds of valid, selfish opportunities to do that. What you're saying is humanity is a value to me. What you're saying, and that is true. All other things being equal, humanity is a value to me. I'm glad that there are other people around. It enhances my life. Not everyone. I've got to be discriminating, and that's got to come from my values. But for God's sakes, never sacrifice. The other thing is, I mean, sacrifice for sure. And the other thing is never, ever, ever, ever enable someone's vice. So often, what we end up doing is we end up actually supporting their own self-destruction out of a sense of compassion. That's no compassion at all either. Not only are you defeating your values, you're defeating their values. It's a lose-lose rather than a win-win. So those conditions are absolutely vital to understanding when it is appropriate. Because, it's a funny thing to say, but when it's selfish to help, is really the only time it's going to be benevolent to help.
Yes.
They are coextensive. They are coextensive. Non-selfish, so-called benevolence is no benevolence at all to anyone.
No. It's interesting. We can give the extreme example. Somebody's terrible to you and you help them out anyway. What we do, though, is we look at people who maybe they weren't good to us or maybe even really bad to us in some way, but we make excuses for them. And not just excuses, reasons, tough childhood, went through a lot, and that's why they were terrible to me. But, you gave an example recently, and I'm going to circle around at the end of the episode to this. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about, of a certain criminal who was in jail, couldn't figure out psychologically how to turn it around until he accepted when somebody said to him, given what you've done, you are exactly where you should be in prison. That acceptance of, I was the bad guy, I did the wrong thing. And it does not help that person to face that, to say, oh, well, you had reasons and life was hard. Yes, sure you did. And sure, life was hard. It does not help that person to make excuses for him. And it certainly doesn't help him to say, yeah, keep hurting me.
Yeah. Yeah, we have an interview, Ayn Rand Center UK, coming up with this very individual, and he does not like to even talk about it. I mean, he had an extraordinarily rough childhood. I mean, it wasn't just a troubled childhood. It was a violently traumatic childhood over and over and over again. So having read enough psychiatric reports on criminals as a prosecutor, I can tell you that the odds of someone coming from that extreme a context, not having a happy, life, are pretty slim. But he is a sort of a demonstration of free will, of volition, and how dedicated efforts and consistent thought, hard thinking, and consistent acting can actually reshape your character. It took years, but that you pointed out exactly correctly. The epiphany came when an older inmate, he was feeling self-pity and he was going off like a lot of inmates do, about how awful the place was. And guy turned to him and said, no, you're exactly where you need to be, Michael. And boy, that epiphany hit hard. And when he realized, yeah, I did something wrong, I should be punished, I did something dangerous, they need to protect themselves from me. When that realization hit, I'm where I need to be until I can fix myself. That's the beginning of moral reform. Right. It really is.
Yeah, and that's a challenge for a lot of us. We either want to say he's a good guy or he's irredeemably evil. That's not reality-based. The reality is you can have full sympathy, total understanding. Yeah, I get how you, and still you have to say, and given everything, this is what's got to happen to you. You can do both. And that makes me want to jump to the fourth question here. So Leonard Peikoff was asked, again, we're talking about altruism versus benevolence. Leonard Peikoff was asked, according to Objectivism, is it immoral to not help a complete stranger in a matter of life and death? If you don't think It's a valuable investment of your time and effort. Unquote. Now, Leonard Peikoff jumps right on
And the
that
phraseology of
last
some of
phrase
these questions is just
the way they're phrased. And it's great because it gives us, the pleasure of watching Leonard Peikoff really examine, if you mean this, and if you mean that, and you can't leave it fuzzy. You can't
Right.
leave it undefined.
Right.
So Leonard Peikoff starts off his answer. He says, well, it depends on the situation, depends on what kind of help is required and what does it cost you. And then he says, it's not enough for objectivity to say, oh, I don't think it's valuable. What is it that you don't think is valuable and why? You have to judge according to the values involved. And then he gives examples. He says there's a huge spectrum. You have to judge the particular circumstance. Say there's a man treading water right next to a dock, crying help and reaching up with his arm. And you say, oh, I don't want to get my t-shirt wet, so I don't consider that a valuable investment.
Well, look, it's a new t-shirt. Can you imagine the value of a human life, all other things being equal, just pluck a human life at random, the value of human life as such, all other things being equal, nothing else known, that is a value to me. And for me to say that my t-shirt not getting wet is a greater value in this context is not understanding the objectivity of values. And as Leonard says, it's bizarre. People are just used to this. I value it because I value it because I value it kind of logic, taking either their emotions or their preferences as sort of rock bottom axiomatic givens. No, objectivism is, well, one of the reasons we call it objectivism, folks, is that the saying, is it a value, is the beginning of an inquiry. It's not the end of the inquiry.
Right.
Yeah.
And this idea that either strangers are an altruistic need for sacrifice or they mean nothing to us, even if they're right in front of us.
It's strange.
Those are the alternatives.
But I mean, if I was asked to risk my life, it was pretty sure I was going to die in the process. Well, then, of course, I have some considerations about saving a stranger. But if it's my t-shirt, I know I'm picking two extreme examples to make the point, but it makes the point very vividly. Would I throw my life away for a stranger? No. Would I, on the other hand, would I be concerned about getting my new t-shirt wet? No. Human beings are a value, but they're not such a value that, let me put it this way, that I'm going to save Adolf Hitler, who's drowning under any circumstances, much less him in preference to someone else. No, I still have to keep my judgment and my discrimination with me at all times.
Right.
It's strange.
It's a great example he gives too, because he lays it out in length. But first, speaking of people of value, I've got to say thank you to Nick Bruno with a big super chat. No question, just thanks to us. Thank you, Nick, for that. Any of y'all, I know you're all out there contributing to Robert Garmong's fundraiser. Incidentally, you can find the link to that at robertnasir.com. But by all means, put in your super chats to make your comments and questions stand out. You deserve to have that happen. ARCUK certainly deserves your help for reasons wholly selfish to you. Let me just read a little bit of Leonard Peikoff's answer, because, as you say, it's easy to look at the extremes, but he says about the guy who doesn't want to get his t-shirt wet, well, he's a stranger. Why should he have any value to me? Leonard Peikoff says, I would say that's completely immoral. If you're an objectivist, you should value human life to the extent of helping. If it doesn't cost you anything, it costs you nothing relative to the value of human life. But he says, now raise the ante. I love this. Suppose you're on your way to your wedding and you're in your tuxedo and there's only 15 minutes to get there and he's got his hand in the same position crying out loud. More at stake now. But if you said, well, it's not a valuable investment, I would still say I disagree with you. If you hold the proper value of a human life, then I would say, well, I'm going to get to my wedding late and wet, but I can't let this guy die.
Exactly.
And then he clarifies a bit more. He says, but now suppose your bride falls over the other side, same time, and he's calling out from his side. Well, then you let him go. That is definitely not a valuable investment of your time. I love how he keeps using that questioner's expression, valuable investment of your time, to point out how subjective that is.
But if I can only save one and my bride fell in too, I'm
Right.
sorry, I'm going to go for my bride. I,
Exactly.
I still get to have my selfish values here. That guy is a stranger. I don't know if he's what he is, who he is. And if I can only choose one, come on, it's going to be my bride. And there's nothing wrong with that. A parent, some stranger's child is in danger. Your child is in danger. Is
Right.
anyone going to condemn the parent for going for their child? For saving their child at least first, or if that's the only one they can save, their child? Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's an assertion of your values, and it's still a defense of human life. You're still there defending human life. You're just saying, my life would be really miserable without this person. I'm going to go for them if I have to choose, or go for them first. Yeah, when there's nothing wrong with that. Again, people feel this weird sense of guilt when they're making value decisions like that. Look, if my bride and the stranger both fell in at the same time, and I had to choose one or the other, and I didn't choose either of them, then I would be anti-objectivist, anti-life, totally opposed to values as such. But if I can only choose one and I don't choose my bride over the stranger, it's the same thing. What am I doing here? Am I protecting human life as I value it?
Right.
My friends, do not feel guilty for being selfish in this sense, but understand human life as such is a selfish value.
Yes. And that really is the answer to Peter Singer. Yeah, the philosopher, the modern philosopher of altruism, who always gives the fountain example. You see a young child fall into a fountain. He's drowning. Should you ruin your shoes to save this child's life? And if so, if you're willing to ruin $100 pair of shoes to save the child, why don't you right now write a check for $100 to save the children in Africa, many more of whom could be saved? Why does it matter that the child dying is right in front of you? And my answer to Peter Singer is because he's right in front
One of you.
of me,
Yeah,
This touches
right.
my life.
First of all, I question his premise there. Do I know that the $100 given to charity would be of greater value? No, 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 no. I don't know that. That is not a given. But what is apparent, and far more apparent to me, is that I could do something about the child right in front of me. And that's the way, that is actually the most effective kind of help, is arm's length help. These giant international organizations spending half their or more, 90% or more on their promotion, reach out, and advertising, with only a small percentage that actually gets to their alleged objects of charity. No. I'm not a big fan of a lot. I mean, there are certain not Red Cross, for example, I know is near and dear to your heart. It's also near and dear to my heart. There are certain, I'm not opposed. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm opposed to giving any money to organized charity. But when you think about it for a few minutes, the kid in front of you is far more immediate, direct, and certain in your ability to help them if you value human life than, say, cutting a check to one of these international groups. And in that case, I don't even care if it's my $1,000 Bruno Magli shoes. If it's a child's life in front of me, I don't care if it's a complete stranger. That's worth more to me than my expensive shoes. Come on.
Yes, exactly. It matters to
It's
me because
strange
it
how
matters to me.
Yeah, isn't it strange how people look at these things? The most effective kind of charity, by the way, is arm's length charity, is when you can know that the person is not going to just enable, you give some money to someone. Are they going to just buy heroin and put it in their arm and continue their slow suicide? Or is this person actually going to use the help I give them to turn their life around and make it better, or, and they're worthy of it? And it's not a sacrifice to me because I can afford it. Well, when those conditions are happening, that's effective help. It's anything else is not compassion. I'm not being compassionate if I impoverish myself. I'm not being compassionate if I'm enabling that guy's vice. No, you can't. True benevolence requires that we have an objective set of values and we use our own judgment. I mean, that's where it's got to start. And it's bizarre to me that all of these other descriptions of how we should feel altruism completely evade that issue. They really don't care about the actual effect on human life. It's
Yes.
your intention to be, kind and compassionate. That's all that really matters to them, I suppose, when they don't really care about the impact and the effect in the real world. That requires reason and egoism, my friends.
Yes. And that's the answer to the conflict of altruism versus benevolence. You do these things, you help these people, you honor your parents if they deserve it, you honor your friends and even strangers you come across, most of whom are decent people, when it is to your self-interest, when it has value significance to you. And it can't be, as Leonard Peikoff points out, wholly subjective. I don't feel that they're of value to me. You have to judge things. You can't throw your money away, nor do you want to turn a cold shoulder to everybody you ever meet.
No.
Yes.
Take those 9/11 jihadist terrorists.
Yeah.
They may have been raised by madmen who conditioned them from childhood to be hateful mystics. Okay. They could have been, and frankly, I don't care.
Yeah.
I am not going to feel compassionate for these human beings, these adult human beings in the 21st century, killing thousands of innocent civilians. No way. They are monsters. To feel any compassion for them would be wrong. And what is my guide to that? My own selfish interests, my own rational judgment, about which nothing can take priority, or my compassion is meaningless. It's not compassion in any sense. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Right. And frankly, I don't care how you were brought up. Everybody, every child, at least every adolescent at some point makes the decision, look, here's what I was confronted with as a kid, and the buck stops here. I'm not going to do this to other people. I'm not going to do this to my children. You either make that decision or you don't. And that part, no matter what you've been through, is always open to your choice. And not just you, but how you judge other people. At some point, they could have chosen otherwise.
Amen.
Yes. So absolutely, all the benevolence we can get, all the goodness we can get.
Even the guy who we're going to talk to, who was in prison for all those years for doing a pretty awful act. Yeah, it applies to him too. He had a point in his life, he says around 16, 17, he was conscious that he was choosing a life of crime, even with his horrific background. He says, could I have done differently? Could I have chosen at least better? Yeah. Was I at a certain point, was I consciously evading? Was there a certain point where I was consciously choosing a life of crime, which I knew to be dangerous and harmful? Yeah, even he at a certain point knew and made a choice, even with his background. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. We all of us are responsible for our conscious behavior as adults. Thank you very much.
One of the interesting things about Mr. Leibowitz, when we talk about forgiveness, is that he doesn't expect it. And you see this if you've encountered him on the social networks, when he's talking to a group of people or interacting. If somebody says to him, no, I know what you've done. I don't forgive you. I don't want to deal with you. I don't want anything to do with you. He doesn't resent it. He doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't say, oh, but I'm better now and you should. No. It's like, I get it. I understand that some people are going to react.
You have no duty to, right? He absolutely gets that. And in fact, he'll follow up with things like, no, my trust has to be really earned now. Wow. I understand. I appreciate your skepticism. Make me earn my trust from henceforward. Wow.
So in that regard, since we've gone there, that show is just 40 minutes away. I used to say you've got an hour, but no. After we wrap, we usually go about an hour. You've only got half an hour because at 5:30 UK time, 12:30 on the East Coast, the Daily Objective goes live half an hour earlier than before. And the reason is that usual 6 p.m. time slot, UK time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock where you're at, James. It's now the Daily Collective. Now that's a provisional title.
No.
Soon we're going to come up with a brilliant name for that show. You know, we had 5 people on the other day. We could call it The Five. Oh, no, wait, I think that's been done.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been great doing and watching and seeing these shows with several hosts. So again, 12:30 Eastern time, whenever that is where you're at, in 39 minutes, an interview with Michael Leibowitz. I halfway expected you to do that, James, but no, Nicholas Krusek is going to be doing that interview, and I was glad to see that as well. That's going to be good.
Oh, I've
Episode
already
number-
spoken with Michael on podcasts before. I think Nicholas is just the right fellow for this.
Yes.
So please tune in. Yeah, you guys will find it, I think, inspirational.
And then for the collective episode today, among other things, the libertarian alt-right pipeline. This is going to be good to see the development of how libertarianism has become, you know, Ayn Rand used to call them hippies of the right. Where they're at right now is an under-exaggeration of just how far off the rails they've gone. I don't even recognize any of these people as defenders of liberty or classic liberalism. It's really, I mean, I know weird is kind of a weird word, but I can't think of any other word to describe where libertarianism is at these days. So definitely tune in at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast for The Daily Collective. And if you have a brilliant title for that show, by all means, feel free to put it in the chat, maybe with a super chat, to help support what the Ayn Rand Center UK is doing. But James, I really appreciate this discussion of altruism versus benevolence. And I knew you'd be just the guy to talk to me about it.
You know, if I could just put in one more plug for the Ayn Rand Center UK. If you're a paid subscriber at a certain level, you get some perks. And one of the perks you get is you get to participate, even as a juror, in these mock trials that we've started to do. The distinguished British barrister Matthew Humphreys will be defending on Saturday Rosie Ginsburg for being a road blocking stop oil protester in Great Britain. And I will be leading the prosecution on this. So if you're interested in these stop oil now fanatics in Great Britain, we're going to be putting them on trial here. But it's only if you're a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK at a certain level. So folks, do check it out. These are fun. These are informative. And everyone's having a great time so far. You know, and that's just one of the perks you get as a subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. If you think it's valuable, I mean, and consider the daily collectives that were started. As you pointed out, 5 the other day, and I was blown away. What we're doing here is we're creating an international community of students of objectivism. And if you think that's a value in itself, like I think it's a value in itself, then please, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK. I think we're doing some of the most important work in the world, just in terms of creating an international community of like-minded people and starting this conversation. So thank you, Robert. This was a brilliant.
That's going to be great.
Yeah.
On Saturday, the idea of Matthew Humphreys playing the devil's advocate for Rosie Ginsburg playing the devil's advocate, that's going to be really good. One more shout out before we wrap up. Again, if you want to help Dr. Garmong on his cancer journey, there is an episode of my Sunday show, Amy and my Sunday show, at robertnasir.com, as well as a link to that fundraiser. Folks, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining in. James, thank you for an excellent conversation. Looking forward to seeing what happens at 5:30 UK time. Again, the Daily Objective with Michael Leibowitz, interviewed by Nicholas Krusek, is going to be great. Daily Collective at 6 p.m. or 1 o'clock Eastern is also going to be great. Thank you to you, James, to the ARCUK for providing this content. It just keeps getting better.
I think so. Thank you.